Hey guys, welcome to Haunted Tales from the Old Rocky Chair. This is your host, Christina. I'm making sure everything's set up so we can get going today. I do want to do a special shout out and thanks to Emily Reid and her family. She made this gorgeous theater box, is what I'm calling it, for me to do the podcast and do my little setup. So I want to say a big thank you to them, and I'm just blown away by it. It's got the RGB, did I say that right? RBG lights that do different colors and stuff in the back. It's all solid wood. I was blown away whenever she gave it to me over the holidays. So I'm going to put a lot of work and use into it, and I just greatly appreciate it. I want to make sure I thanked you during the live. We're just waiting, see if anybody jumps on here real quick before we actually start the podcast. Tonight we have some really good stories involving executed murderer shadow people. I know that's a mouthful, but there's a story about that. Some demonic murderous children and some heartbreak family tragedy. So we got a mix here tonight, and of course many more. So yeah, let me check the time. We got about a minute to go, and then we'll get rolling on the actual podcast. I see we got a couple people jumping in. We might wait a couple minutes to see who else is standing by to, I understand it's the holiday season. I'm excited to be back. We had quite a couple weeks of chaos. My daughter had to go out of town for a couple weeks to handle some issues. Unfortunately, we had a family tragedy of a suicide in our family, so my daughter had to go take care of that, take care of some personal business. So I had the kids, and if you have grandchildren, it's hard to have a quiet hour, let alone a couple hours, 8 to 10 to 20 hours to create a podcast. So I stayed up 2 nights, the past 2 nights, to make sure I had a podcast for you guys this week. I'm sorry it's been a couple weeks, but hopefully we'll be doing it every week until you guys get sick of me. So, okay, let me see if we're ready. Let's do a little time check here. Alright, let's see if we can get going. Hope you guys enjoy it. As always, I'll be here live the entire time to chit-chat with everybody.
Special broadcast. This work is protected by Creative Commons license. And now, a word from our sponsors. Staunton, Virginia this fall to experience the creepiest place around. Take part in the Ghost of Staunton Tours, produced by Marty Siebel and the residents of Staunton. Ticket prices range from $8 to $13. Private group rates are available. Learn more and investigate the tales of Mary Baldwin from the Mary Baldwin College, the Old Western State Mental Asylum, and much more. For tour times, ticket prices, and dates, visit their website at www.ghostofstaunton.com or call 540-448-2743. Available tour dates are limited and filling up fast. Make sure to secure your reservations for this fall season. Get out of the house and become a part of history. The Ghost of Staunton Tours, only in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. CDC guidelines are followed, and for questions, please visit www.ghostofstaunton.com or call 540-448-2743. The Skeleton Key. This mystical shop, found exclusively on Facebook, is stationed in Blossom, Texas. Purchase all of your very own unique religious, spiritual, and metaphysical items, to include the beginner altar kits. Find them today on Facebook. Remember, you've always had the key.
Welcome to the haunted tales from the old rocking chair. And now your host, Christina Spencer.
Well, hello there. Come on in and get cozy by the fireplace. Let me get settled into my old rocking chair, and I'll tell you a couple stories. Haunting stories. Stories that are not for the faint of heart. Some of these stories may not be about hauntings per se, but nonetheless will haunt you. Because after all, some of the most scary things in life are not ghosts and demons, but the people we cross on the street. If you're brave enough, keep listening. If not, get up and leave now, because you'll never be the same. Don't say I didn't warn you. Welcome to the haunting stories for the old rocking chair. Inferno, written by u/hyperobscura. Check out his Reddit page on r/obscuratio. A link to the story can be found in the description. Everything was on fire. Everything. I remember that so vividly. The mesmerizing, erratic dance of vertical and horizontal flames in infernal unison. It wasn't for the harrowing threat of the imminent death, I'd even consider it to be a beautiful work of surreal art. I managed to get the mother out fairly quickly. She collapsed at the bottom of the stairs leading up to the second floor. Desperately convulsing in hoarse coughs, she inhaled too much smoke, is what I figured. "Oliver," she gasped. "Basement." Husband? Kid? There was no way to know. I rushed back in after getting her to the paramedics. No time to waste. The house was on the verge of collapsing, and I could maybe risk 5 more minutes at the most. Before I got to the basement door, a piercing scream permeated the air, somehow drowning out even the deafening roar of the flames. I rushed towards it, throwing furniture left and right in my panicky approach. There he was, hiding under a burning couch, terrified and alone. "Oliver?" I shouted. "Are you Oliver?" He was rolled into a protective ball in the corner, eyes darting back and forth. He nodded weakly, his pale face drenched with sweat. "Come on out," I pleaded. "I'm here to help." He shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "Now," I yelled. "Look, kid, there's no time. We have to go." He shook his head again, edging further back into the corner. In an act of desperation, I aggressively reached out to grab him, but he instinctively pulled back, like a cornered animal. "Not yet," he repeated. "We're out of time." I could tell by the near-crumbling walls, the color of the hellish flames, and the horrifying sounds of the dying house, and the intense heat. We had but seconds before we were both reduced to unidentifiable charred remains. In a last-ditch effort, I put all my remaining strength into moving the couch. It was heavy as all frick, and more or less completely ablaze, but I managed to move it just enough for me to grab onto the kid, drag him out of there, and haul my ass for the exit. I remember that moment perfectly. The house caving in a second we hit the pavement, the paramedics swarming us, pulling us away from the incoming barrage of fiery debris. I must have been laying there for minutes, catching my breath, staring at the night sky, now all but lit up by violent sparks. "Where are they?" a weak voice demanded. "Where are the children?" I looked up, meeting the terrified gaze of the assumed mother. "Oliver," I said, "he's with the paramedics." "Not Oliver," she yelled. "His sisters." "No, there were no one... I told you, the basement," she wailed, tears now streaming down her face. A cold chill ran up my spine as I heard Oliver giggling in the distance. "He locked them in the basement." She's Watching You by user/rbartz. I used to work in a residential care home. The care home had capacity for around 30 residents, set over 4 floors. At the time of my experience, the upstairs was being renovated to add capacity, so some rooms were empty. I never worked night shifts, only late shifts, which finished around 9:30 p.m. During winter, it became dark early, around 4:30 p.m. The late shifts feel lonelier when it's dark, and the managers, kitchen staff, and extra carers leave at around 6 p.m. 3 carers would stay, 1 to do the meds, 1 to do the baths, and 1 to do the tea trolley and bedtime assistance. This particular day felt unsettled. The weather had been so miserable, and it was dark and gray all day, with thunder and lightning setting in later on. Most of the residents were back in their rooms straight after dinner, instead of sitting in the lounge like usual. That night, I was doing the tea trolley and bedtime assistance. I sat up in the kitchen and split off from the other girls. They went to the other end of the house. I was knocking on the rooms, delivering tea and biscuits, and having a little chat as I went along. A little while into the tea round, an assistant's buzzer went off in the upstairs room, so I parked the trolley and ran up. The resident was complaining that someone had closed their door. Closing the doors required someone to remove the kickstop, which are pretty stiff. I assumed that this resident had been pottering around and set it off. I reset it, checked he was happy, and nipped back down to where I'd left the trolley. But it was gone. Thinking one of the girls had finished their rotation unusually quickly and had picked up the trolley, I went to answer another buzzer. I popped my head around the door to explain that I'd shortly helped this resident into bed, and this lovely lady was sitting there, locked into her armchair by the tea trolley, helping herself to biscuits, saying that the lady with black hair whizzed in and left it there. Everyone present that night was blonde, gray, or bald. No one had black hair. The residents on that particular floor all had very limited mobility and used walkers. I couldn't think of a single resident who could have moved the trolley, and the staff wouldn't have due to safety risks. I finished the tea round, bumped into the other girls and told them about it. We all agreed it was strange. I finished the teas, then went upstairs to help a lady. Her name was May, into bed. May had dementia and would often talk a little bit incoherently. I was smiling and chatting with her, popping her pajamas on and pulling down the bed. Then May took her teeth out, pulled a really strange expression and said, "She's watching you, the little girl behind you," all the while staring over my shoulder into the dark corner of the room. I have experience with dementia patients. It didn't show that this had flustered me and carried on putting her to bed without turning around. May carried on. "She knows all about you. She's moved my chair. She's watching you." And then she laughed and laughed as if they were in on a joke. I didn't turn to look in the direction of May's chair. My bad for not acknowledging her at this point, and carried on getting her comfortable. I left the room without glancing back in the direction May was staring in. Every hair on my body stood on end, but I shook it off and carried on with my shift. The next hour was uneventful. A few residents popped their heads out and asked if everything was okay, as they'd heard footsteps running around. I said it was probably us going back and forth. Finally, at 9 p.m., I sat down with the girls, and we had a bit of a joke about how weird the shift had been. Just then, a buzzer went off, and we glanced up to see which room it was. It wasn't a number we recognized. You get to know every room number attached to each resident. We looked at each other a little confused. My colleague ran into the office, consulted the floor plan, and said, "It's the top floor bathroom. Isn't that being renovated?" I didn't even think that was wired in. Is anyone up there? Two of us went up together, in case someone had gone wandering. Unlikely, as the residents in that part of the house needed support mobilizing, and the new rooms were empty. We both had goosebumps as we walked up the stairs. The beep, beep, beep of the buzzer felt like it was counting our steps. The hall lights were on dimly, but we couldn't see any light coming from under the bathroom door. The unfilled rooms along the corridor seemed really dark and empty. I pushed the door open and pulled the light switch. My stomach flipped. In the middle of the totally empty bathroom was May's chair. We turned the buzzer off and went downstairs to finish our shift. All of us felt quite shaken and were glad to clock off when the night staff arrived. To this day, we have no explanation. The residents at the time wouldn't have been physically able to pull off this prank, and there were no visitors on the premises that evening. There were definitely a few regular ghosts or spirits that made themselves visible to the residents and night staff, including the little red-headed girl. I'd likely write about those another time. Usually it's comforting to know that the residents feel family or spirits around, but that evening it definitely felt like they were trying to spook us, and I'm so glad I didn't see anything. Tech on the Wall, written by Joseth Moore. Check out his short story compilation at www.smashwords.com. Ever wonder if those smart speakers, you know, the ones you talk to and they respond, record any of your conversations? The technological ability is there. What conversations would you prefer not to go public? Debbie, list articles on the Supreme Court's hearing on the tech industry. The white pyramidal-shaped device, about the size of a can of soda, flashed its multicolored lights to indicate that the smart speaker had received the young law student's command. The device's voice was female in e-gender, with an American accent. Melissa Mendoza was seated at the dinner table of her dining room within the small apartment she rented in downtown Miami. She was trying to complete a term paper for her class on the United States Supreme Court. She had gone to Orlando for a family funeral over the last 2 days and was now having to make up time on her paper for it. There are 5,700,000 articles on subjects related to the U.S. Supreme Court and the tech industry. First article. Debbie, stop. Melissa blew out a frustrated sigh and dropped her hair-cropped head atop her crossed forearms. After a while, she lifted her head up and grabbed her nearby smartphone and started scrolling for any updates from family and friends. Melissa checked the news cycle since she'd been so engrossed in her paper for the entire day. She ran across an article by a major media journal source about how there had been several lawsuits over the technology industry's smart speaker devices. She read the article on her phone and began to wonder about her situation. Debbie? Melissa almost felt silly that she was embarrassed about talking about sensitive subjects with a piece of technology. Play back my conversations with Tyson. Melissa wasn't sure if smart speaker technology had such features. She had heard about it before, but the article she had just read verified it was true. Playing latest conversation with Tyson, the device spoke. Melissa heard her voice and that of her now ex-boyfriend from a few days ago. The quality of the recording was sharp, but given that people were moving around a lot within their home, it wasn't perfect. But that was not what was bothering Melissa. Debbie, stop. The recorded argument ceased and left an eerie silence in Melissa's dining room. As with so many humans, she unconsciously walked up to the triangular device as if talking with another human being. Confusion was on Melissa's face. Debbie, how many conversations are there of Tyson and I? There are over 5 conversations recorded with Tyson, 1 with Melissa, and 4 with others. Now that wasn't right. Melissa had just bought the smart speaker nearly 2 weeks ago, and there was only 1 conversation that Melissa had with her then boyfriend in the apartment since purchasing the device. University term paper long forgotten now, Melissa's mind was reeling. Debbie, play all conversations of Tyson without Melissa. Playing all conversations of Tyson without Melissa. Hey, Paul, when are you coming over? I don't have that much time before she comes back. It was Tyson's voice. He was apparently talking on his phone with someone that Melissa had never heard of in her ex-boyfriend's life. Yeah, bring her too. Melissa usually gets here around 6. Don't worry about it. I told you, I sold all that. You better make sure you take your bag out of your car in case the cops stop you on the road. Dude, haha, yeah, I was. Debbie, stop. Melissa felt there was something off about Tyson, but she had no idea that he was selling drugs. Was there more to him? Usually hardcore drug culture had other drama associated with it. Debbie, play next recorded conversation with Tyson. Playing next recorded conversation with Tyson. This recording was different. There were several other people's voices in with Tyson's. A party in Melissa's apartment on the day she went out of town, without Tyson telling her. But within the horde of other voices, Tyson struck out to Melissa. Hey, just let it go, dude. I told you I don't have it. And I tell you what, the next time you threaten me, it'll be the last thing you... Debbie, stop. Silence. Debbie, what was the day of the second recording of Tyson you played? The flashing party lights on the small white pyramid blinked. Yesterday, 6:39 p.m. Yesterday, Melissa said to herself. Smart speaker tech was such that the smart device would only respond to the user upon the device's name used it first. So there was no response from the pyramid. She thought further. Debbie, play most recent recording with Tyson. Playing most recent recording with Tyson. You killed Tyson, you idiot. Paul, hurry up. Get this place cleaned up before she gets back from Orlando. No, put him in the garbage barrel. Tomorrow's trash day. Melissa had wondered why the trash barrel was so full when she had gotten back from Miami. Anna, won't you come home? Written by user/BurntSchmidt. My little sister Anna was kidnapped when I was 8 years old, 22 years ago. We lived in Leavenworth, Washington, a town nestled tightly against the valley of the Cascade Mountains. A ghost town at one point, there has been an abundance of folklore about this place for centuries, dating back before the frontier of the Oregon Trail or Wild West to the Watauga tribe, witchcraft, spirits, phantoms, and even mystical beasts that roamed the forest. An amalgam of apex predators, the head of a wolf, legs of a cougar, claws of a bear, and eyes of an owl, as one was described in a book I once read. which only emerges once every 200 years enveloped in thick red fog, and afterwards all of the children disappear within and are never seen again. Anna was 6 when she went missing. Before that, we were best friends, and we would spend most of our time together, especially at Icicle Creek, about a half-hour hike where we'd escape to the solace from the clutches of drunken rage, in which the massive salmon travel upstream amidst the babbling rapids, as Anna gently rested her head against my shoulder, a momentary lapse of a child's much-needed solitude. We had an especially strong bond because we were rejected by the kids at school. We both were covered in scars, cigarette burns, and lash marks from a leather belt, so much so that we were forced to wear long sleeves, even in the summer, to avoid being called freaks, or the most common moniker we received at that time, the Addams Family. Before she disappeared permanently, Anna had begun running away. I'd wake up in the morning to see my dad carrying her under his arm from the woods, covered in mud, her tiny limbs dangling and swinging, and then he called me to the living room and forced me to watch as he tightly looped his belt in his hand. I still have nightmares about the squealing. I dream that I'm in the forest inside a thick fog, and there's that persistent high-pitched screaming, punctuated with the sound of a whip cracking the skin. But I don't know which direction to run in to save her, and whichever direction I decided to try in this particular dream only takes me further away, and I always awaken the moment she cries out my name, Feather. My name is Heather, but Anna couldn't pronounce it correctly, so she simply resorted to Feather. And hearing that name audibly register from her lips in the midst of staunch desperation and searing agony only makes it more personal and tragic for me. I have these nightmares often, and to this day. I don't know exactly what happened to her, but I know my dad had something to do with it. The very day she disappeared, I can recall watching my mother at the kitchen table, a liter of vodka and an ashtray with a mountain on it at her fingertips. She was chain-smoking while my dad walked about the house with his tool belt on, clutching a beer and cheerily humming the theme song for that old TV show Father Knows Best, ironically enough. The police came by several times over the next month or so, but nothing transpired. She was reported missing, and the case went cold. And that has been since 1989. I left home at 17 with my then 23-year-old boyfriend, and we ran away to Chicago, where we lived for years as he would make money renovating apartment buildings and businesses. We broke up eventually, but had a daughter named Olivia, who was the spitting image of Anna. I didn't squander a single second with her. If anything, I spoiled the hell out of her, out of some compulsion to fulfill some part of me that was left with Anna. But just last week, I went back to Leavenworth. I had a death in the family, my Uncle Ricky, in Arcadia, California. This would likely be the last time I ever traveled to the West Coast, so I brought Olivia. I decided to take her along a scenic route up the West Coast and into the Cascade Mountains, to my old house and to Icicle Creek. Our street was left as it had been decades ago, and my old house was still standing. Siding and the roof all redone, an addition added, and the garage expanded. Part of me wished I'd have found a pile of cinder and ash. That is, until I noticed 2 little girls chasing each other around the house, and a young man in a hat getting out of a Ford Expedition, cradling a baby, and I could physically feel my heart warming. I pulled up to the side of the house and verbally greeted the man and his wife, exiting their car as well. They were a remarkably friendly Native American couple, and at my utterance of the house being my childhood home, noticing my daughter in the car seat in the back and flashing her a warm smile, we were invited in, which at first I politely declined. I wrote a reaction of common courtesy, but at the man's insistence, I got Olivia and we went inside. I averted the stories of abuse and passively explained that my dad died of lung cancer a few years back, but that we were never close, and proceeded to siege into stories of Anna and I, how we spent all of our time together, the majority of it hiking and spending time at Icicle Creek, and then finally, I brought up her disappearance, The vibe I was getting was thoughtfully reminiscent about Anna, produced almost the opposite reaction than the misty, empathetic head nods and affirmations I was accustomed to from others. The husband, Charles, had been subtly shooting his wife, Maya, furrowed-browed looks of confusion, a reaction she reciprocated in between giving the kids menial demands to stop running and finish their lunch. When I began to explain the disappearance and the case going cold, my sentence was halted by Charles. Wait. I apologize to cut you off, but you said a second ago that she was running away before then? Yeah, I replied. Why? And she would run away to Icicle Creek? Yes, that's where we would always go. I gasped, eyes wide, glaring at Charles, and his sudden reluctance to continue, followed with silence from all of us except for the kids. What's that look for? I asked, nervously giggling in anticipation of what was said to me next, a juggernaut of a comment. You never... He halted once again, looking to be attempting to repeatedly compose himself, looking to Maya, before looking back over to me. Something so monumental that I can't even articulate it, nor can I remember exactly what it was he said. All I know was that within 10 minutes, I'd practically peeled out in my car, speeding down the street, admittedly haphazardly making a few illegal right-hand turns to St. John's Hospital, which has been in the same place all my life. Like riding a bike again after 22 years, I seem to have instinctively memorized the directions from all the times we would drive there in Dad's car to pick Mom up after nervous breakdowns or recuperations after prolonged episodes of severe depression. A mental hospital on the border of Leavenworth and Genoa. We parked and I took Olivia by the hand, pulling her along, my heart practically pounding out of my throat, nerves frayed, entangling in 2 decades of hopelessness, longing, and tears, all compacted into this one day, this one moment. I speedily approached the admissions window, and couldn't believe my ears when the words from my mouth audibly registered, concealing me inside of a reality I couldn't fully grasp or compute. "Can I help you?" the intake nurse asked. And then the words which I'd never thought I would ever speak again materialized, excavating dreams and attaching to reality. "I'm here to see Anna. Anna Fredrickson." My expression devolved into puppy dog eyes awaiting scraps from the dinner table. "Do you have an appointment?" It was real. She was real. All I could get out was, "Is there an Anna Fredrickson here?" Anna Fredrickson. "And you are?" I nearly cut her off. "Her sister. I'm her sister." Hyperventilation. "ID, please," the nurse insisted, which I had already been pulling out of my wallet. Her hand-out facial expression of empathy and understanding somber catharsis in that moment. She knew exactly what the situation was. I was asking to please sit and wait, which I did, shaking, sweating, and Olivia, Anna's splitting image of the last time I saw her, seated in between my legs, fiddling with her coat zipper. Charles said to me at the mentioning of Anna's name, "Wolf Girl." "Heather Miller?" I looked up, wiping the sweat from my brow, to see a Native American man in a white lab coat reaching down to his knees, wearing glasses, black hair combed to the side, and a very gentle disposition in his expression. "That's me," I replied, standing up immediately. The doctor led me down a long hospital corridor to an office with Legos on the floor and containers of Play-Doh, smiling warmly at Olivia, telling her, "Have fun while I talk to your mama, okay? Okay?" She responded with her usually cheeky grin before shuffling off to the other side of the room. The doctor locked the door behind him and sat down across from me. "Where are you coming from?" "California. Arcadia, actually. Death in the family. My condolences." He could see the nervous excitement and anticipation in my face. Okay. So, Anna, we conversed for a long, very long, in fact, period of time. By the end, I was sobbing loudly, face buried in my hands, as the doctor gently reached out and sympathetically began lightly rubbing my forearm. Words triggered deep emotions that I never could comprehend I could feel. Trauma, sexual abuse, likely, left for dead, feral, incoherent, unresponsive, mute, inarticulate, relearn, basic human interaction, violent, breakdowns, night terrors, relearn, utensils, visual, auditory, breakthrough, began to speak again, 11 years. Normally, the protocol for a situation like this would be prolonged, incremental, familial reintegration. Anna had been through much heartache, anguish, and grief, internal and, sorry to say, external trauma. I'll tell you now that she's got the mental capacity of a child, not much older than the last time you saw her. This is an extraordinarily sensitive situation, so I can't promise you a lot of time. She will need to slowly get to know you once again, and to be honest, she might even know who you are. We've made such progress over the last 10 or so years, and we must be delicate. Please, doctor, all I want to do is see my sister. That's all. Just see her in the flesh. I'll comply, I'll concede to any instructions you give me. Just please, I beg you. Oh, no, you don't have to beg, the doctor laughed, bringing a much-needed split second of lividity to all this. She will be mildly sedated, and there will be a nurse in the room. I cut him off. Doctor, I just want to see her, okay? Okay, Heather. The next 10 minutes felt like a millennia. I've never felt so nervous, and I was shaking like a twig in a storm, my hands clasped between my knees so tightly I could feel the sweat rolling down on my wrist in drips. Then finally the doctor opened the door. Heather, this way, please. My heart was racing, my veins pulsated. My blood pressure so high I thought I'd pass out before I got there. I was led down a short corridor, coming to a room at the end of the hall to the left. The door opened, and a husky male nurse standing authoritatively against the white padded door. I stopped before I reached it. I had to breathe. Take your time, the doctor said. I glanced up at the nurse, flashing me an empathetic gaze, and finally I turned the corner. In the hospital bed, sitting up, clutching a pillow in her arms the way a child hugs a teddy bear, was Anna. Bone-thin, staring at the floor, face partially obscured by above-shoulder-length blonde hair. But it was Anna. As 22 years of grief smoldered and burned down to that last moment I saw her, kissing her shoulder scar and gently kissing her forehead before saying goodnight, or goodbye, all of this time evaporated as if it never happened, and I saw that little girl again. Big blue eyes, tiny thin nose, and dimples on her cheeks. I got dizzy, dropped my purse to the floor, and clasped my hands over my mouth. The tears began to flow, able to break through the most fortified of dams, and I cried out, "Oh, Anna!" I fell to my knees in total shock and mental disarray. For a period of time I can't remember, before firm hands grasped under my armpits and pulled me up to my feet. Though the profuse deluge of water pouring from my eye sockets, I wiped it away to see those big puppy dog eyes fixate on mine. Hand over mouth, I slowly approached her, the scent of flowers and pine circumventing the room. Whether real or imagined, and slowly and steadily I leaned in, lightly pulling the pillow from her arms, wrapping her in my embrace, and pulling her in cheek to cheek. At first her grip was loose, but then a physical response to my whispering into her ear, "Anna, baby, I've missed you so much." Her arms tightened around me, and she gasped. She began shivering, the warmth of her palm fastened over the back of my neck. I'd been longing so deeply and regretfully to hear once more drew from her breath, delicate, soft, but clear as day, in a whisper, "Feather." My friend's life seems perfect on Instagram. I found out it isn't so perfect after all. Written by user Robert Mort. My friend Callie has the perfect life. I mean, look at this shit, posted on Instagram a week ago. John made an impromptu campfire in our backyard tonight. We ate s'mores, stargazed, and fell asleep. I'm so blessed. Hashtag happily ever after. And underneath was a beautiful photo of Callie, John, and their 2 kids lit by campfire. The kids were smiling and well-dressed. He was handsome as always, smiling, a shadow of stubble along his jaw. She had a full face of makeup and a cute dress. I mean, really, do other moms have time for that? Because I sure as hell don't have time to put on makeup. I barely even have time to go to the bathroom. Okay, maybe I was a little jealous. But I mean, come on. She was beautiful. Her husband was some hotshot doctor. Their kids were perfectly behaved at playgroup. I was a total disaster compared to them. The next day, there was another update. Even on my bad days, John is my sunshine. Today he made dinner, my favorite, hashtag eggs Benedict. And he tells me I'm beautiful even when I'm not wearing makeup. Hashtag love my hubby. Underneath, another perfect photo, although this one was even worse. Trying to look imperfect, down to earth. She was clearly wearing makeup, but natural enough that I couldn't argue on it. I could make out the caked layers of foundation around her left eye, more than really seemed necessary. I wonder if she got super dark circles under her eyes, or ooh, a huge pimple. Then I frowned. You're being mean. Of course she has embarrassing imperfections. So do you. So does everyone. But I couldn't help but be jealous. Every day of parenting my two kids, I felt like I was spinning out of control. I was barely keeping it together. Only one diaper blowout or a three-nager tantrum from going insane. This woman, she was actually enjoying motherhood. What the frick? Look at this woman, I complained to my husband one night. She just posted a new photo. Her kids in a little fort John had built them in their finished basement. My husband is so talented, he built this fort for them in one day. It's absolutely hashtag perfect and hashtag magical. Look at the little drawers. Oh my God! Nice fort, my husband said, through a mouthful of Doritos. Do they sell those at Amazon? No, he built it. That's awesome. I narrowed my eyes at him. How do they have time to do stuff like that? It's ridiculous. We're barely staying alive here. Nannies, he said, shoving more chips in his mouth. What? They got a nanny, obviously. She does all the lousy work, like cleaning poop and doing laundry. Then they have time to frick around and build forts. Huh. That was a possibility I hadn't considered before. I smiled, feeling a little better about myself. Yeah, maybe that's it. I stared at the photo. The kids stood inside the fort, which looked expertly constructed. Inside, the little girl and little boy poked their heads out smiling. The little girl's hair was perfectly pinned back with a bow, and the boy was wearing a fancy button-down shirt. Behind them, the basement was clean. Even their toys had been put away. John crouched next to them, handsome with his wavy dark hair and brilliant white smile. Perfect. Magical. I felt a pang of longing. Then I turned off my phone, rolled over, and went to sleep. When I woke up, there was already a new post from her. It was a selfie of her and him, standing together on a boat. Behind them, the sun rose, painting the sky in beautiful hues of red. The open sea glistened and sparkled. My hubby surprised me with a wonderful trip out in his boat. Feeling so blessed right now, I love him more than hashtag everything, more than life itself. I stared at the photo. Something seemed a little off about it. For one, he was holding the camera. Usually when I saw the couple's selfies, the woman was holding the camera, because the man never really wanted to take a selfie in the first place. And the way she was sitting was weird, too. She was leaned up against him, her arms tucked behind her. A horrible realization hit me. I scrolled up through her last few posts. Hashtag happily ever after. Hashtag eggs Benedict. Hashtag love my hubby. Hashtag perfect. Hashtag magical. Hashtag everything. Taking the first letter of each hashtag, they spelled something out. Something horrible. HELPME. Help me. I glanced at the post of her on the boat, 6:32 a.m., a little over an hour ago. More than life itself. He was going to kill her. I grabbed the phone and called the police. After hours of searching, they finally found them. Callie tied up on her husband's boat. John armed with a knife. When the police searched the house, they found the two kids locked in the fort in the basement. Scared, crying, but completely unharmed. According to Callie, John started beating her months ago. He gave her a black eye then. A few days later, he took her on his boat, planning to throw her in the water, never to be seen again. She knew he checked her phone, read her text messages, her emails, wouldn't allow her to make a call without him in the room. So she sent out a message through hashtags, hoping he wouldn't catch on, and hoping that someone would hear her plea. Help me. Working in the Old Courthouse After Dark. Written by user/stiggz. Throughout my whole life, I've been enamored with the practice of law. I watched Andy Griffith every day after school, eventually graduating to Law and Order while doing my algebra homework. Matlock, he was one of my favorites, a swift and nimble mind. Columbo, the turn on his heel, he knew how to make a smart eye contact and much more when to drop a clue. Years later in university, I watched all the CSIs, Ally McBeal, Night Court, whatever I could find. I graduated law school a couple of years ago now, after taking my master's degree in psychology. The bar exam took me a try or two, but now I work as a junior DA. I was finally living the dream. My days were spent researching for lawyers, determining precedent prior to launching a case, or more commonly, mid-trial to fact-check the law library based on the changing facts of a case. The law library, yeah, that's where it started. I was working late, as usual, unpaid, researching a potential armed robbery charge. The defendant waiting patiently in county. I was trying to find exactly what culpability a suspect who had found a weapon nearby actually possessed at the time of the crime. I cross-referenced a case that we laid and failed 10 years prior, and a charge leading to a guilty plea in a neighboring state. I'd gone through school the hard way, working night jobs in factories and bars, but never before had I spent extended time in a place as creepy as our underground B3 law library. They always sent me here after dark, when the building was empty. Of course, I had a key, but it still bothered me. Knowing no one was around increased the tension of every perceived movement from the ancient corners of the room, which smelled of 100-year-old books and mildew spilling from long-forgotten file cabinets. We kept the documents, evidence, microfiche, blood, hair, all sorts of samples, for hundreds of years after all, just in case. And the old courthouse was built in 1803. I swear we still had all the old files. A district attorney would serve for 4 to 8 years before finding a district more well-paying. Never would one find a reason to destroy any documents or items in our library at all. The place had ghosts, if ghosts could be said to exist. I sure as hell didn't believe in them until that night. Even now, ghost is putting it mildly. I finally found a good line of reasoning, a great idea which might make the DA think of my name during the hearing next week, at least. Digging through our wiki and doing my share of cross-referencing that night, I shouldered my laptop, smiling and thinking of the episode of Suits I might still be able to watch with my wife before she dozed with me on the couch. That's when I saw it. The corners. The shadows. For the first time, the shadows were talking and looking at me. A wicked grin, blood-red teeth, and a voice that bound me back into my chair. Get out of this place. Be gone. You've been here before and we've not complained. But tonight is our night. This hour is our hour. And this place is our place. Spoke the ephemeral form of the murderer we nailed 16 years ago. Finally given the chair just last week, in B4. I knew it all along. I knew that they were watching me, feeling me here. It was true, the average page here is 60 years older than I. The gruesome inventory was the tip of the iceberg here. This place had secrets. I had tried to ignore them. Why had they sent me here at all? I couldn't have been the first to hear them. The ghosts, and I looked up. It was just then that I noticed to my horror and my shock I was dallying, taking my time, leaving the place that had surely been declared off-limits at the time. That's when I noticed them coming from the corners. All the corners. All the darkness. Hundreds of them. Gruesomely executed ghosts. All with red, wicked smiles and now holding weapons. I sprang up from my chair and sprinted to the elevator, praying to all the gods that it was still on my floor. The darkness closed in behind me as the door closed. I checked my watch. 3:33 a.m. I had the good fortune to clinging to my life. Next time, the law library for me is the library upstairs. But when will I know when their time is, and their day? Today's date was November 26, 2020. It made no sense. It was a ritual thing. Perhaps I'll leave law behind, in its stories, and its buildings, and rich, varied history. I could always take up programming, or sales, something more modern and less scary. I stole at Walmart, which nearly got me murdered. A true story. Written by user /BurntSchmidt. Pardon my writing, I'm no Tolstoy. This was an incredible, stressful, painful piece to get through, and I've been traumatized since, and in therapy. I was always a frail, tiny girl, and uncomfortably alone in public. Many things scare me, but most especially the idea of being abducted or tortured. With that in mind, read on. One day, I stole something at Walmart. I was 16. Not a big deal. It was a scrunchie. I hid the cardboard it was attached to and sat it behind a bunch of paper towels. And then, on the way out of the store, I was pulled aside. Come with me. A large, imposing man croaked in a deep, baritone voice, with an expressionless, apathetic look on his face. I'm sorry. What's this about? Theft, he said. Frick. They had me on camera. I'll just pay and leave, I told him. But he said nothing. He just tightened his iron grip around my tiny arm. And when I said iron grip, I mean it. Like a vice grip. We walked through 2 plastic doors into the storage area and stopped atop a set of stairs when he flicked on the light. They were leading me to the basement. I couldn't see beyond the bottom step because it was pitch dark. Let's move, he spewed angrily. I began stepping down the staircase and I heard whamp, the door slamming shut behind me. I turned and feverishly tried to open it, but it was locked. I figured they were just holding me until police came, so I made my way to the bottom. The room was dank, wet, and dusty, covered in cobwebs. What was most bothersome was how dark it was, and the fact that there were no people down here. But there was an old chair, a wooden chair, in the middle of the room, and handcuffs attached to chains which ran to the brick wall. Where are the cameras? The loss prevention guys? The frickin' manager? I screamed to myself. It smelled like mildew and something else, like rotting meat, coming from the far side of the room. The darker side, where I didn't want to go. I decided to sit on the bottom step, and thoughts began racing, most especially about the man who brought me down here. He looked disheveled. He wasn't wearing Walmart attire. He was in what looked like some cheap, phony police uniform. I noticed his FOP shoulder badge partially unstitched, his hands covered in dried mud, and the scent of intense BO. Frick this! I pulled out my phone and called the store. I transferred myself to speaking with the manager. Thanks for calling Walmart. This is Destiny. How may I help you? Yes, I'm stuck in your guys' basement. A man grabbed me, told me he was the loss prevention, and that I stole something and brought me down here, and I can't get out. Suddenly, the door to the basement opened, and I heard the sound of whistling, and a creak, creak, creak of the wooden stairs. I backed to the corner and picked up my chair, ready to use it as a weapon. The man and another, even older man, the former probably in his 40s, and the latter in his 60s or so, both emerged at the bottom of the stairs with huge, wide-eyed grins on their faces, with a man in the security uniform twirling a baton. Have a seat in the chair, baby cakes, he said creepily. My skin was crawling and my heart was pounding, and my stomach was queasy. You tight? I bet you are, he said, as the old man began rubbing his crotch. but slowly inching closer to me before unzipping, and then, well, you know. I held the chair up like I was ready to swing. Tight and wet, aren't ya? I wanted to die. I said the only thing I could. I'll frickin' kill you. She's gonna kill us, he said, turning and speaking to the older man, heartily laughing. She thinks that rickety old chair will do something. The smarmy, slimy old snake giggled with a voice full of phlegm, which he spat on the floor. The old man took off his shirt and belt and wrapped the belt around his knuckle. I was going to die. That was until, hello? Anyone down there? The men, startled and freaked out, ignored me and ran into the dark, opening some door and exited out into the woods. A door which set off the store's fire alarm. An employee came down to talk to me. Destiny, the active manager. The theft was glossed over. I was only able to identify the man in the security uniform. The other, well, I didn't see him on camera, which they went through with me. The rotting smell was a dead dog, which nobody had answers for. Let me give you one piece of advice, she continued. From now on, only trust a person in a Walmart uniform. I understand, I said. Oh, and by the way, our loss prevention office is upstairs. The men were not found, at least not yet. I think my town is haunted. A true, current, scary story. Written by user /uglylittlemungbean. With the last story I posted about the crying woman, I started to seriously think about looking into my town's history. I live in Western Australia, in a small mining town in the Pilbara. For my own safety reasons, I will not disclose the name of the town. Instead, we'll call it Wilkins. Taking place shortly after the crying woman happened, I slowly started opening up about my spooky experiences to the few friends I have. I was experiencing the usual underwhelming responses like, oh yeah, that's creepy, and then moving on to the next topic. To my surprise, they shared their own spooky experiences with me. One of them told me, when he first moved to Wilkins, he had the opportunity to work night shift at Kohl's. Usually, it'll only be him, his manager, and 2 more employees for the night to clean and restock the whole store. When he started working there, he expressed his concerns straight away to his family that he was being watched, along with misplacement of the box cutters and the pins and finding them in odd and dangerous places. Like his box cutter, one of his co-workers was stacking the highest shelf when the box cutter fell onto them, having the blade out almost cutting their faces. Even though he is certain he had them on him at all times since, he was always consistent on having things in order since the manager was pretty strict on keeping everything in check to not lose work supplies. One night shift, he was desperately trying to finish restocking some produce down on an aisle since it was short-staffed, it only being himself and the manager that night, plus it was close to clocking off for the night. He would usually have his earphones in playing music when he worked, so when he heard a man's voice growling right in his ear, "Not there," he spun around and startled to find no one there. He tried to shrug it off as hearing things. That is until when he turned around to grab the next box. He found it at the end of the aisle, looking like someone had just thrown it. As he tried to make sense of what just happened, he knew it was impossible to be his manager, as she only worked in the back of the store. My other friend, she told me quite a few examples of what she'd witnessed. She would do house sitting as a gig to earn some extra cash. Then she would use the money to go out for the weekend to the pub regularly. Many times when she house sits, there would be some pets she had to look after too. Things that would happen usually. She would see a figure in the corner of her eye moving and sometimes seeing them sit in the corner of the room, misplacing things when she was sure she had placed them elsewhere, and seeing the cats and dogs growling, hissing, and barking at nothing, and not going into certain rooms of the house. She mentioned sometimes the radio and TV would turn off at certain times of the day, along with lights turning off in a strange pattern as if someone was walking around the house turning them off as they go. During the day, she would take the owner's dogs for a stroll around town. Even in a busy little quaint town, the air felt eerie and otherworldly still. One experience she told me, however, is one I will not forget easily. After a night of having a drink or two, she was ready to go home. In a smart routine, she called some of her friends or her parents to pick her up and drop her off home. But this particular night, no one answered. She decided to walk home as she couldn't be bothered waiting for someone to answer their phone. As she walked home, she could feel herself getting more sober by the minute. She felt that her chest was tightening up, making her feel panicked. She thought she was having an anxiety attack. She continuously kept looking behind and around her, explained that she felt like she was being followed. After a while of walking, she stopped and sat down on the curb of the road and tried again to call as she figured it was safer. Dialing number after number, but to no avail. Softly in the distance she heard soft cries and groans, along with the sound of chains and shackles being moved against each other in a rhythm. As she looked up, she saw that across the road was a park. The longer she looked, she noticed dozens of shadowy figures emerging from the trees, each one different in size and shape, slowly walking around and looking all hunched over. Frozen in fear, she desperately tried to get up and run, but only to start crawling as fast as she could away from the park. The shackles clanked together, growing louder and louder, along with the groans and wailing sobs. She noticed a separate clanking of shackles coming from behind her. Too afraid to look, she managed to finally get up and run. She ran to the nearest house and banged on the door. The people inside were a couple with a few kids and were kind enough to drop her home. She never told her parents, or anyone else for that matter, because she didn't want to be criticized and be made fun of by little Jab saying she's an alcoholic and just seeing things. After hearing the stories of my friends' haunting experiences, I decided to do a bit of digging and asking around in Wilkins. To my own discovery, almost everyone I spoke with had their own unique stories to share, yet they all had a similar theme. Each of their stories, they mentioned hearing sobs, cries, and the clanking of shackles. I don't really understand how this all could be and how similar their stories are with each other. I think my town is just haunted. I hope you all enjoyed all of our haunted tales this evening. If you would like to discuss any of the stories on tonight's podcast, I'm always live during and after the podcast every Sunday night starting at 7 p.m. Join our community on our Facebook group page and YouTube channel. If you have a haunting story of your own or artwork and you want to submit it for consideration for the future show, drop me a line on our Reddit page or email address. All our links are below in the description. Special thanks to Dark and Mood for all his wonderful art that you can check out on his Reddit page. I want to thank all our brave storytellers, for without them there would be no show. A detailed list of story credits are in the description. But most importantly, I want to thank you, the listener, for taking time out of your day to listen to Haunted Tales from the Old Rocking Chair. I hope you have a wonderful night, and as always, sweet dreams. All right, guys, that's the show for this evening. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure if you can do me a favor and share it out, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, if there's anybody interested in listening to the full podcast that may have missed it during the live, I always upload every week to YouTube, the Haunted Tales from the Old Rocking Chair YouTube channel. Make sure you go over there and subscribe and comment and give it a like. I greatly appreciate it. It helps me out a lot. If there's any stories in particular or genre of stories that you would like me to look into trying to find, like whether it's shadow people or the creepy encounter ones or just regular haunted house stuff, or cryptoids, let me know. I'll see what I can find. It's a great community over there on YouTube. So, as always, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and make sure that you have some sweet dreams. All right, guys, have a good night.